Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Love Rising podcast. Today we have our guest, Kylee Seifert of Molly Kate Wellness. And interesting fact, Kylee and Molly have the same last name. Isn't that neat? Very random. They're actually not related. But we know that it is meant to be because Molly's awesome and she's going to come on and talk to us about perfectionism, overachieving, and kind of how that weaves into intuitive eating and of course self-care and all of the things that we love talking about. So I met Molly on the gram, on Instagram, and I just loved her stuff. I love her energy. She's super upbeat, super practical. So definitely make sure and follow her over on Instagram at Molly Kate Wellness, and we will put your other bio stuff in at the end, or your other social links and that kind of thing. So here is her official bio. Molly is a certified holistic health coach who helps women shed the shame around food so that they can get food confident. Molly teaches women how to start on a path of intuitive eating that will allow them to ditch the diet mentality, start experiencing joy and pleasure around food and life, and finally get comfortable in their own skin for good. So that is Molly. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So we love to start out to give people kind of that personal connection with you. What's your story as it revolves around this subject today, or however you want to tell it?
Yeah, for sure. So my story really starts in kind of college when I started realizing I had a lot of food intolerances and I was trying to figure out my digestion. So that's really actually where it all starts. Of course, the perfectionism and overachieving was insidious way before that. And I hadn't really realized it yet, but digestion is kind of where this intuitive eating, self-care, wellness thing started. So I started experimenting with going gluten-free and going dairy-free, and I felt a lot better, and so I kept doing that for a while. I actually was pretty strict about the gluten-free thing, even though I wasn't a celiac, so that's kind of like an interesting tidbit that I really didn't need to be, but I just felt like I needed to control that super hard for whatever reason. And so I continued doing that. Mm-hmm. I ended up, you're like, I've been there. I continued doing that and just kind of was going on with my career and my life. Ended up going to graduate school for athletic training, which is what my full-time career was at the time. And I kind of got halfway through grad school and just everything felt like it was falling apart. I just felt like my life was just going to shambles and I didn't exactly know why. And I started kind of over controlling a lot of things because I felt like everything else was out of control. And I started restricting my calories excessively. I was trying to restrict to 1,200 calories, having a super active job, and also being a half marathoner at the time. So if anybody is listening and knows anything about nutrition, 1,200 calories is totally not enough, obviously. And so I was going in this cycle of restriction and binging. And then, of course, feeling like a terrible person for binging, and then trying to restrict to 1,200 calories again, and then binging. And I was just in this crazy cycle. And I was also super focused on getting to this number on the scale, right? So many women are in this place where I was probably 128 pounds or something. And I wanted to be 125 pounds so badly, which looking back is just hilarious to me because I'm like, why 125 pounds? That's
water weight.
Right.
Yeah, we fluctuate 5 pounds per day.
Right. Yeah. And so I would get on the scale and feel bad that I gained a pound or two from the day before. But now I know that there's no way that I gained an actual pound of true weight overnight. It's just hilarious how we think that is real life. Oh my God, I gained 2 pounds. What did I do? And so anyways, it was just,
but if I can just say something here, we say that, but to our listeners, that might actually be news to some of our listeners. And I think it's a really empowering fact to share. And so I'm so glad you brought it up.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're listening and you just shame yourself super hard for gaining 2 pounds, know that it's pretty impossible, literally, not pretty impossible. It is impossible that you gained 2 pounds of true weight in one day. It's just not how the body works. That poundage is more, everybody says water weight, but there's so many things that go into water weight, right? How much you actually ate, did you go to the bathroom this morning? What's your hormonal balance? Like there's so many different things that go into that. But I was getting into this place of just like, not even just guilt, like I felt bad, but like I was telling myself I was a bad person because I couldn't meet this calorie count. I couldn't get to that weight that I wanted. And I basically got to a place where I told myself I didn't deserve any of those things. And which eventually turns into, if you have that kind of a dialogue, turns into you're not deserving of happiness and love and being who you want to be. And I luckily at the time had some really, really great friends who I was talking to about all of this stuff. And they had histories of more clinical disordered eating than I was having. I was more in like the mentality kind of just habits realm, not necessarily clinical eating disorder. And they were asking me some questions that were very pointed, and they helped me realize like what was going on in my mind and with my eating, and everything was just not normal at all. And so to recognize that from my friends was super helpful. I went to go see a therapist, which was great. The next step for me in my healing journey was, instead of restricting and binging, I just went to straight binging for a while. I remember very clearly chocolate was my drug of choice at the time. I remember so clearly there was a handful of times, probably more than a handful of times, when I was nauseated by how much chocolate I ate, and I kept going. I just kept eating because it was my numbing practice at the time. I didn't have the tools to, create other ways to deal with the emotions that I was dealing with. That was the only thing that I knew at the time. So that's kind of when I started to realize that maybe my perfectionism was an issue. Maybe that's when I really started to kind of toy with the idea that what are my own expectations of myself instead of what are other people's expectations of me, because I think that's where this overachieving thing kind of plays into it. Is I was so focused for so long, and it's still been a journey, on what other people's expectations were of me and achieving those things instead of digging a little bit deeper and figuring out, okay, what do I want? What does Molly actually want? And now in my intuitive eating journey, I've actually just literally recently in the past like month, have just asked myself, what do you want to eat, Molly? Like, what are you craving right now? And it's just so interesting now that I have the tools to self-reflect and look back on some of those experiences and just tie everything together. And another important message to your listeners, I think, is that this is a journey 100%. There is no end goal. I feel like I've been intuitive eating for a while, but literally in the last month, I've been like, whoa, there was a big missing piece for me. So even though I am a health coach and I help women through this, I'm still going through that journey myself. And I think that's why podcasts like this are so powerful, because we're just all coming together and sharing with each other and letting people know that they're not alone and not broken, and we can all do this together. So I think I went on a lot of tangents there with my story, but that's kind of where I'm at.
That was so great, because I pulled a few things out and was taking some notes about it. And I guess one thing that I thought really stuck out, and I see this over and over with my clients and with myself, it's definitely part of my story too, the restrict and binge, right? So like, and then you went to straight binging for a while. And I thought that was interesting too, because even that in itself was giving yourself a little bit more permission, right?
Yeah.
And just to elaborate on that for our listeners a little bit, that does tend to happen. People who are going from binge, restrict, or just a lot of restriction and maybe a little bit of binging, because basically at some point, when you restrict so much, your body will either start to shut down, you'll start to get sick, you'll start to have a lot of issues, or you will actually start to binge. Like, there's no other option. Your body needs more calories. You can kind of think of it like that. Your hormones need balance. I always say, like, your body is smarter than your mind. Your mind says, I want to restrict 1,200 calories, but your body's like, hell no, you can't. And so you binge. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I work with hundreds of women on, binging and disordered eating patterns. And when you just start to track, sometimes they're not tracking, like they're not eating, until like 3 p.m. and they're not even really aware of it. And then when they track that and they see that, and then they're like, I always go home and I just binge. I just binge at home and I don't know why. And there's an emotional component for sure. But sometimes that physical component of it is like is it. Like I just had a client that we were planning to work together, you know, for months. And we kind of went through this process of seeing like, how much are you actually eating? And she wasn't eating enough. I think she was eating like around 1,200 calories, working out all the time. And now she's eating more. She got that permission from me, and she's fine. She hasn't, you know, she's like, I thought I had this binging problem, and I don't have this binging problem. I just was starving, you know?
Thank you.
And so, yeah. And so anyway, so there's that. And then there's also that piece of like, I started, and then I just went straight to binging because it was like my coping practice, which can you talk a little bit more about that and like how you were able to, because that's a sticking point for a lot of people that I work with is like, well, I'm just going to go and binge now. And then it's like, they feel so awful about it. But I have a bigger perspective, obviously, because I've seen it so many times. I'm like, you won't stay there, you know, like you'll want to figure out what to do after that, but you do have to kind of let yourself go through that process. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was very multifactorial for me. And I think it's multifactorial for pretty much everyone. There's never just one thing that like flips the switch and you're like, oh, I'm so much better. But one thing that I'd say to my clients is like, if I ask them, what are you craving? What do you want to eat? And they're like, well, if I think that all the time, I would just want to eat cake and cookies and whatever all the time. I'm like, I dare you to try it. Like eat cake, breakfast, lunch, and dinner and see how you feel. And they might, you know, you could do that for a while, but eventually your body's going to be craving more nutritious things. So part of my journey getting away from that binging was one, seeking help. I think that was so important to have somebody kind of walk me through, you know, what are you really craving? Is it a food that you're craving? So I would ask myself, okay, I'm hungry right now. Okay, what food are you hungry for? If you can't answer what food do you want to eat right now, then there's probably some other thing that you're craving, and that could be emotional. You could be bored. You could be lonely. You could be, there's so many different things. So I think my therapist really did help me be able to kind of start sorting through, you know, what am I actually craving for? I think that was really helpful. Also just starting to appreciate and recognize what my body could do. I think so much of binging is so tied to self-worth and body image that I wasn't really like honoring my body at all. And I was a half marathoner, and I had an active job. And so I wasn't showing my body the love it deserved for the things that it was able to do. Like it's able to do amazing things no matter where you're at, no matter whether you're a half marathoner, a desk jockey, like whatever you're doing, like you can find something to honor your body for what it's doing for you. And that was a huge shift for me as well. And then eventually I will admit, like I'm a little bit like torn about these reset diets, but it did really change like my perspective on food, going through like a Whole30. I know you're doing a 21-day sugar detox. So I've done I've done 2 Whole30s, 1 autoimmune Whole30, just to kind of get some more clarity on food intolerances, and a couple of sugar detoxes. And I think the first time I went through them, I didn't go through them in the right mentality necessarily, but I think they can be really, really powerful in helping you get really clear on what foods really are nourishing your body, how good you can feel with real food. And then when you ask yourself, what do you want, you're going to be way more confident and be able to trust yourself even more about, okay, what do I want to eat right now? Maybe in that moment you really do want a cookie, but maybe in that moment you also really want like a really awesome salad with grilled chicken and fruit and this like awesome homemade dressing, or whatever dressing you love. You know, like I think getting really clear on how much I really loved real food and what foods nourished me and what foods I didn't really feel great about. And that just helped me start to trust myself a little bit more. And I think that's something that I work with my clients on, whether it's related to food or not, is helping them trust themselves and their inner desires and needs, and giving, like you said, giving them permission to be okay with that.
You brought up a couple really amazing points that I wanted to touch on. And really it's creating this like trusting relationship with your body. And I can't tell you also how many times I've heard, well, if I just allow myself to eat, like, yes, I'm going to eat the cookies and I'm going to eat this and that. And yes, you might go through that. Yeah, you might for a little bit, but honestly, just like you said, your body is a magnificent being. It is unbelievable. Like God, the universe, whatever you call it, created your body, and it is more intelligent than anything we could ever come up with. And so if you are going to fear that all you're going to do is eat all this stuff, the sugary stuff or whatever that you've fallen into the trap of before, you are in for a true surprise. And I want for you to find whoever, if anyone's dealing with this, find the support you need to hold your hand in growing that trust with yourself, because it is there and you will be amazed at what you discover. And then another thing that I'm so glad you brought up, Molly, is that yes, these reset diets, I agree, you do kind of have to tread lightly with them, and you do have to be in a good headspace. But I think that some of like the Whole30 or something is really good at reshaping how we think about food and how we think about like these quick fixes. Like I won't say any specific diet plans, but with shakes and things like that. And it'll help us to re-understand that like whole food, real food is the absolute most healing thing that you can do for your body.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love how you talked about, trusting yourself again. That the way you put that was really, really beautiful. So that was awesome for the listeners.
Yeah. And yeah, I also kind of pulled out that thing about the reset diets, because I struggle with my audience and putting that kind of stuff out, because it has the potential to be triggering, or it has the potential to look like, oh, Clara thinks we should be doing diets. And that's where I think it's really important. Like you said, you did it with the wrong mentality. And like, it's all about the energy with which we do it. And I am someone that really wants to walk in, and I think we all do, the subtleties of this stuff, because it's subtle. It's not that reset diets are bad. Like it could be really easy for us to say, oh, diets are great, right, at first. And then we realize, oh my gosh, we had all this emotional stuff and we were doing it with the wrong mentality. And then we say, oh, they're bad. And that's like the other side of the spectrum. But the truth is that they're very therapeutic in very specific situations. And so if we can't do it with the mentality of, I love myself and I know that this is going to serve me well. And it's like, not this like me doing the 21-day sugar detox, there's nothing like miserable about it. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, I have the time and the space in my life right now to be able to reset my blood sugar. And I can't explain, and this is my experience initially when I did this with the right mentality for the first time, like these Whole30s and these sugar detoxes, was like my mood is like so much more stable when my blood sugar is balanced, and I can make decisions from a place that are so much more grounded. And my husband's doing it with me too, and he's saying the same thing. He's like, man, I don't have that like kind of like intense hangry thing going on. And so it's not to say that one's good or bad. It's all about the energy with which you do it, but they can be very therapeutic. And we're all here sitting here are nutritionists as well as people who promote self-love and intuitive eating and our own inner guidance when it comes to food. And so it's not to say that these things are, and we definitely don't want to get in a cycle of we have to be doing one of those diets all the time. That's what I see. It's like they're doing another Whole30, another Whole30, another Whole30. Whole30 isn't the way, it's not a way of life. Like it could be, but it would take a lot of discipline and restriction and not enjoying necessarily, parties and social events and things like that. But it is a great reset. And if you can do it with that mindset, then it can be amazingly therapeutic. Anyway.
Yeah. And I think if you read the Whole30 books, they even say that, like you want to reintroduce foods, you want to see how they fit into your life, and then you get to make that decision. And I think you brought up an interesting point that I want to kind of circle back to, is this like good versus bad mentality that we have. And it's not only just with food, but if we want to tie this back into overachieving, we're so fixated on rules, and that can be so detrimental. That's just not really how life works. Of course, I have always prided myself on being a rule follower. I was with that kid that like never got in trouble in school. I was never a rebel. I was an angel to my parents after the preteens. Preteens were kind of rough, but but really, like, I was so caught up with other people's expectations. So I was just a rule follower to the T. And so I think that really translated into and was a major factor into my disordered eating patterns that kind of developed. And then even after I started realizing what was going on, I still had this mentality of good versus bad food, and getting to a place where I now am reframing that into no foods are good or bad. They're just food, right? You might get some sort of impact from that food that you eat, whether that be digestively, emotionally, whatever. And that could be a good impact or a bad impact. And that's what we need to focus on, rather than, oh, this is a good fad or a good food. Oh, I was so good this weekend, or I was so bad this weekend, just getting out of that good versus bad mentality and really taking it more inward and thinking, how does this nourish me emotionally, physically, spiritually, whether that's food or whatever you're doing, any experience. So it's really interesting that you brought up that good versus bad, and I think that's good to touch on.
I'm so glad that we did kind of circle back to the overwhelm, because for me, and maybe we can I want to explain this in a way that's not only about food, because I've been experiencing this idea of overwhelm and the good versus bad, kind of like you were saying, Molly, and a little bit more of like letting stuff just be, as in, if I don't get to the dishes, or if I don't get the bed made, or if I don't get the food prepped, it's not good or bad. It just is what it is. And if I continue to strive to constantly have those things in perfection, I become overwhelmed. And there is no space for fun, playfulness in overwhelm. And that's something that I found I was really lacking in my life, was this fun playfulness. And it was because of the overwhelm of, oh, I need to clean my car, and then I need to food prep, and then I need to make sure all the dishes are done and the bed is made, and like this idea of perfection that I've kind of been letting go of. And I think that can tie into food and these like random little overwhelmed tasks that are day-to-day tasks as well.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, you said so many good things in there that I want to like come back to. I think what you said with like when you're constantly thinking about those rules, that's restrictive, and so then that gets overwhelming, and you almost shrink, and you want to be expansive, right? So like what and all those things that you said, I was like, oh yeah, I totally struggle with that. Like, I should do the dishes, blah, blah, blah. So this is coming from a place of like, I'm totally relating, but like, let's work through this together. Like, I want my life to be expansive. And when we have so many rules, it gets restrictive. And I think I got to a place where I felt so restricted, and I honestly started telling myself things like, I'm not resilient, I don't have grit, I'm not determined or focused, because I was just so constricted. And so making space for those little joys and playing, like you said, I think this is a quote by Brene Brown, but she said something along the lines of, resilience is built off of joy. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like what I've been missing. Like, this is why I don't feel resilient, because I'm not allowing myself the space to play and the space to experience the joy. And it doesn't have to be big joys like, oh my gosh, I got, I graduated grad school and got my master's degree and I'm so smart and awesome. But like little joys, right? Like taking my dog for a walk, and when she like nose dives into the grass to roll in the back and like roll around. And then sometimes I'm walking my neighbor's dog too. He's here right now. And sometimes we'll do it together, and it's like just the cutest thing ever, just like rolling around in the grass together, like best friends they are. So just experiencing those little joys and recognizing them more and more makes you more expansive, and it makes you more resilient. And that's super cool that we can become more resilient and more of the badass human that we are by playing and experiencing joy. Like, that's super cool.
Oh my gosh, I love that. This idea of resilience. And one thing that I've been doing and encouraging my clients to do is like, if I have a moment where I'm not doing anything, and I know, Clara, you said this the other day, like, I had a weekend where I didn't have anything to do, and I like had to fight that urge to like find something to do. Right. And I think every woman, probably a lot of men too, but men do this better, can relate to that. And so I've been asking myself, like, what would 9-year-old Kylee do? And I was sitting outside in a lawn chair, and I was like, oh, there's a million things. But what do I want? What would 9-year-old Kylee do? And I literally went and climbed a tree in my yard. Do you know how long it has been since I climbed a tree?
Oh my God, that's
It
amazing.
was so much fun. And I like scraped my back and like whatever, you know, but it was just like, I got down and I was just like on another level. It's something so simple as that, you know, our child like kid would do that we just like feel like we don't have time for, and therefore we forget about it.
Oh yes, I love that. I love that you just went and climbed a tree. I'd probably get arrested in Chicago, but
Well, when you live in the middle of nowhere, we have lots of trees. Yeah, totally.
Man, yeah, there's, oh my gosh, there's so much good stuff here. And I think the thing that really stuck out to me that is like an on the ground practical tip is if you are deciding, you know, because, okay, so there's two concepts here. One is masculine versus feminine, which I always like to bring that in. And that's, you know, the masculine is the structure. The masculine is the rules, the discipline, the parameters, right? And so that was like, you gave this great visual, Molly, of like, I was boxing myself in, right? Like, and I think Kylie was talking about this too. I just felt like constricted, and I have to make the bed, and I have to do the dishes, and I have to eat perfect, and I have to have a great relationship with my parents, and I have to have, you know, all of these things. And if I don't have those, there's something wrong. And it's just like we make ourselves smaller and smaller and smaller. And so the masculine is this, like these kind of walls that we put up, right? And then the feminine is the flow. It's that joy. It's that at an instant, just randomly, we climb up a tree. Like it's that flowingness, that openness. And so in harmony, these two work really well together, right? Because if we have the structure, we have the walls, then we can flow in between. And the best example I feel like that resonates with me is yoga on the yoga mat. We stay on the mat. That's the masculine, right? We have the space and the room, and the doors are closed, and we know we have that hour of time, and we don't have to think about anything else. That's the masculine. We need that. And then the yoga itself, the moving and the breathing and the being connected in the present moment, that's the feminine. And so we have to understand that we need both, like, because I've seen the opposite. And I think us three are probably more masculine minded women. Like we probably tend towards definitely perfectionism. Overachieving is a masculine tendency, because that's really all about like structure and like external validation and all these things. But there is the other side of that. I have seen other people who are more feminine, like they have too much flow. They don't have enough structure, right? They can't like structure their day. They don't keep appointments. Like it's, you know, they're kind of all over the place, but they enjoy the present moment really well. You know, they're like, woo. And so we just want to make sure that, yeah, that these are in harmony and they're flowing, and there's not, you know, too much masculine is going to make us feel really constricted. There's going to be a lack of pleasure, because feminine is all about that pleasure, that juiciness. And then, so anyway, so just as for listeners to be thinking about that, like when I put rules on myself, does it allow my flow to flow more freely and in a more directed way? Or are my rules making me feel constricted? Are they making me feel small and like I'm not good enough, and like there's, you know, I have to hide parts of myself?
Yeah. That makes me think of too, I think this was more about boundary setting, but it was like there's a difference between putting up a wall and setting a boundary. Setting a boundary shows you where the door is. And I really loved that. And I think that kind of ties really well into that. We do need that. We need those walls and a little bit of structure, but we also need that door to show us which way to go. But also so that we can flow through that. So yeah.
So let's bring it back a little bit. I want to know, what is your definition, you know, and this can be simple, of perfectionism or overachieving?
Ooh, interesting. What's my definition? I think when you are so fixated on external, what's the word I'm looking for? expectations. When you're focused more on external expectations rather than internal expectations, I think that's really the root of it. I don't know if that's necessarily a definition, but I know that for me, that was the defining quality of why it was negatively impacting me.
Yeah, that's right on. I think I love that.
I think that is so good, because earlier on in when we first started talking, in my mind I was thinking like overachieving, perfectionism, judgment, like external approval and things like that. And I do think that external approval is something that truly does drive our overachieving.
Yeah, and I don't think it's all a bad thing. I don't know if you guys have read Gretchen Rubin's The Four Tendencies. Like, I'm totally an obliger. So I do need a component of external accountability for me to be productive. It just, again, has to be like, I don't know if this is the right word, a symbiotic relationship, right? Like, it needs to be benefiting both sides, right? So I need that external accountability, but it also needs to still make me feel expansive and not constricted, like we talked about, and allow me to like feel pleasure about that thing. I think that was one of the biggest things that was happening to me with this overachieving and perfection, was that I didn't think it was okay to experience pleasure in life or food. So that's kind of how that all ties back into intuitive eating with me, is that like I wasn't experiencing pleasure with food, and I also wasn't experiencing pleasure like in life in general. I mean, there was little bits here and there. Of course, I was never like in such a like low state that like I wasn't able to see those things, but I wasn't fully present and enjoying them. So.
Yeah. That reminds that a story that I am still kind of working with in my own life is that, and again, it has to do with this external approval, is like my dad's family specifically, they, I don't know if they're going to listen to this. But anyway, they tend to bond over hardship, right? They tend to bond over complaining, you could say. Which a lot of people have these tendencies, right? It's like, oh, we get together and we like complain. And so I remember feeling like I can't be like happy and everything can't be good, because then how would I get connection? Right? Like,
oh yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And so it's still like something that comes up. It's like, I don't want to just, if someone asks how you are, I don't want to be like, oh, I'm great. Like, super happy, love it. And then, cause then I feel like, oh, there's going to be nothing to talk about, you know?
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah. So just on that pleasure front, like just that, you know, just becoming aware of where are our blocks to pleasure? Like why might we not be able to feel them? Definitely because of a lot of times external expectations, but there could be stuff like that going on too.
Yeah. I love that. Where are our blocks to pleasure? I love that question. That's really powerful. And I think I've recently realized that like the way that I go about like dealing with these things is a little bit of both like cognitive behavioral therapy and like old school psychology. So cognitive behavioral therapy, like what's going on in my mind to create this story, and then like old school, I don't know if it's like Jungian or whatever, like what happened in your past to get you there, right? So like kind of fusing those two so that you can really get the full story of like, why do you have those blocks to pleasure? Like what's going on in my mind now? What story am I telling myself? And also what has happened in the past, not even necessarily down to your childhood, but what has happened to kind of create that story. And then how can I move forward and change that story? Because now I give myself permission to create the story from here on out.
Yeah, so good. Yes, we do have to kind of be aware of like, where is the story coming from? It's not necessarily, oh, I got to dig it and unpack it and all that stuff. It's just like, oh, like my family connects over, you know, like that's the story, right? And then it's like, okay, do I want to choose that story? Do I get to decide? I don't want to do that. Okay. So yeah. I think that
Can I say one more thing? Actually, I want to tie that back into like Kylee kind of mentioned like judgment. And another thing that I've been working on really hard is when I do recognize those stories, like it's hard not to hold judgment on either those people or that experiencing, but forgiving that is so, so important. And the one thing that has really helped me, and full disclosure, I still struggle with forgiveness. It is not an easy thing, whether you're forgiving yourself or other people. But the biggest thing that has shifted my mindset is are they doing the best they can with the tools they have? Did they do the best they could with the tools they had at that time? Am I doing the best I can with the tools that I have? And usually 99.9% of the time, people are. So just getting in that space of they were really doing the best that they could, whether they said something mean to you or hurt you or whatever, they were doing the best they could with the tools they had. And same for yourself. So I kind of wanted to tie that in with judgment, like Kylee had mentioned, because it has been a big piece for me as well.
And, you know, I think it's so easy for us to talk in our podcasts or just in so many different aspects about like judgment. Same with gratitude. Like, oh, it's the way we say it. It sounds so easy, and we understand it's not, because you even said, like, I don't do well with forgiveness. Judgment is difficult for me. Like, these are things that we as human beings are always going to struggle with, and we're always going to have to continue on our path. And sometimes we're going to have to come back to square one and reevaluate, you know, what we're experiencing and the emotions. And I know for me, journaling has really helped me to get clear on these things, and whether it's judgment or whether it's these tendencies of my family or friends or my tendencies, but really getting clear and journaling through those has been a really powerful process. So I definitely encourage anyone who's kind of sitting here thinking, well, how do you figure that out? How do you come to that realization about yourself or your family or anything like that? It's getting back to just sitting in peace and quiet.
Okay. I think
We lost
Kylee,
you for a second.
I think we lost you, but I will. So, oh, there you're back, Kylee.
Hi. Sorry.
No worries. Okay. So I was going to ask though, because I think this specifically affects women, this idea of perfectionism. There's probably an equivalent in men, because I know, for example, like my husband has a lot of overachieving tendencies that may affect him in the same kind of way, like with the lack of self compassion, that kind of thing. But anyway, I think perfectionism uniquely affects women. And so I'd like to hear you speak to that, Molly.
Yeah, I think that ties back into that, like, and I'm really new to this masculine versus feminine energy thing, but I think it ties back to we are caregivers in our energy. Like, we want to serve other people. And so that energy makes us more fixated on those external expectations. And that's where it starts to get dangerous to us, because I think a lot of like perfectionism, the energy of perfectionism is probably pretty masculine, right? Like, we want things to be the way we want them to be. They're rigid. And so I think that's the collision, right? Like, female energy and perfectionism and expectations, it just like creates this storm. So I think that's why it negatively affects women, is because we are so fixated on, and not all women, but I think for the most part, women tend to be fixated on external expectations, because we're trying to serve, we're trying to caregive, and we want to serve other people. And so that validation from external sources is important to us. Probably more so than men. And so I think that's kind of the uniqueness. And I think it actually does affect men. I'd written, what's the right word? I don't even know. But anyways, so I wrote a couple of blog posts about perfectionism and kind of how that turned into self-loathing for me. And just like in general, a couple of times I had wrote my story. I'm really struggling with grammar today, but it's all good. It's not my specialty,
Good.
people.
That's good.
So I had a couple friends and even my brother like reach out and say, wow, like I had no idea that affected you. It's really affected me as well. So I think it does affect men, just in a different way. And maybe even like these are men who have like some feminine energy, maybe more so than other men. And so because they're a man and they have this feminine energy, it's like hard for them to like share that. So I think it does affect men, but I think it affects women in a unique way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a little, it's like, it's meta, it's big picture, but I think a lot of the impetus for perfectionism or overachieving is like we said, a desire to be externally validated. And I think in our society, women aren't they aren't encouraged to trust themselves. And that's like kind of a harsh statement, but I think it's fair. I think it's fair.
So fair.
As in general, women are not raised to trust themselves. They're not expected to trust themselves. There's very much this idea that we need like almost this paternal figure. There's this great book, if you're interested in this subject, called The Shadow King by Sidra Stone. And it's about like women's inner patriarch, basically. And just like how we kind of have this idea societally that we need someone to tell us what to do, or that we need like this strong male presence that's gonna, hold things together for us, and that we can't trust ourselves. We're too wishy-washy, and we're too emotional, and all of that stuff that goes along with like the patriarchy, and doesn't allow us to trust our cyclical nature, to allow that pleasure that is so feminine. And so of course, then we kind of end up with this unique experience with perfectionism, because it's like, did we do good? Are we good? Is it all right? Like someone tell me I did good, or else I'll just keep trying to do good,
Yeah.
And then of course there's also like the whole superwoman thing, right? It's like we're moms and we're sisters, and we're supposed to have, and then we're also supposed to have jobs and be really successful and be these boss babes, and like, so it's like we have all these expectations, and men do too, but I think it's fair to say again that there's not such a unique array of expectations put on men. Generally, it's pretty much like provide for the family, and this is societal. I'm not saying I agree with this, but like provide for your family, be strong, don't be weak, don't be emotional. And like, that's kind of like the expectations of men, right? Which are high expectations still, but like we are also supposed to be mothers and supposed to be pretty and, sexy and not too sexy. And
right. Yeah.
and so anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And I love when you said that women are not really not created, but like our society tells women to not trust themselves. Like, you want to be sexy, and you want to be curvy, but don't be too curvy. And you want to be, muscular, but not too muscular. And like, there's so many expectations that our society puts out there for men and women. But I think it's unique. And of course we're women, so we know our experience. But I think our society is in a really interesting place, and it really does focus on perfectionism and achievements. And I think one of the questions that we had kind of talked about potentially talking about was, what kind of environments like are fostering this. And I think and I'm not saying that like my schooling was bad by any means, but I got so much praise for achievement. So of course I started associating that praise that I was getting for the achievements that I was doing as love and acceptance. And I think that's what tends to happen. And don't get me wrong. My parents will probably listen to this. I was loved hard. Like my family, I was very, very lucky. I came from a very loving family, but for whatever reason, I fixated on achieving. That's what I fixated on. And it was to no fault of anyone, myself, anyone around me. That's just what I fixated on. And I think that's a really common story that people just tend to fixate on that because that's what our society looks at.
Yeah, I think that is very common for women and probably men alike to, you receive praise when you win, when you succeed. And so of course we feed off of that. And so that circles back to, that could be a conversation on its own about digging into self-love and like, feeling like you are achieving no matter what you do and not really needing that external validation. But yeah, it all makes sense.
Yeah. Something I did that I feel like I should share that's really interesting. And it was a long time ago. Before I even had Revolutionary Lifestyle, I was doing voice dialogue, which is the type of therapy that I now facilitate. And in that modality, I was deep in like the work for myself with my now mentor, but, and I was in that modality, you talk to different parts of yourself. So you give name to them. So for example, I was working with my achiever. So there's a part of me who's an achiever, right? And so you give voice to that part, and we were working a lot with that part. And basically what I decided was to do a 30-day achiever detox. So I had no expectations on myself other than I had to go to work. I just had a normal job at that point. I had to go to work, and like that was it. Like, and of course eat and take care of myself for 30 days. All I had to do. And there were some other like little kind of parameters around that, which was like no TV, because it would be really easy for me to like at that point to just like, oh, well, I don't have to do anything, then I just watch TV the whole rest of the time, you know? So there are a few things like that. So it was like I was kind of forced to like be with myself, but it was so enlightening, like to see how much pressure I was putting on myself to go work out, to go eat this way, to go walk my dog, to go do all these perfect things, hang out with friends. And it was 30 days of like, you don't have to do anything. What do you do then? Right? So if anyone has that freedom, which everyone does, but they could test that out, you know?
Wow, that's really cool. I feel like I should do that.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like it really shifted like how I thought about achieving, because my life didn't fall apart. Secret, everything was fine.
Yeah.
I was probably healthier.
Probably got better.
Yeah, I was healthier because I was so stressed out all the time, you know?
Oh, I love that. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could just talk about this. This is a great subject, this overachieving, perfectionism, probably whole podcasts on it, like multiple episodes. But we always like to end with, what is one piece of practical advice for our listeners to act on today if they resonate with this, if they're struggling with this, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the biggest shift that I've done, and something that you can literally start today, it takes nothing else other than to ask yourself the question, like, what do I want? You know, and that it can apply to so many different things. And that's why I think it's such a cool question is, you know, what do I want to do today? What do I want with my career? What do I want in life? What do I want to eat? You know, like just start asking yourself, truly give yourself permission to like listen to what you actually want. And like I said, you can start doing it literally right now. It costs you $0. It costs you zero extra time, and just start getting clear on what you want. And even if you just ask yourself that and you don't feel like you can change that thing right now, the more and more you start asking yourself that, the more and more you're going to start to trust yourself, and you're going to start to feel more aligned with who you actually are instead of who you think you should be. And I think that's super, super powerful. It's been super powerful for me. It's something I work with all my clients on. And like I said, it's free. You can do it now.
Mm-hmm. Love it. That's so good.
Yeah, that is good. There's something, around like these preferences, like stating a preference, you know, like no matter what, like if you're going out to eat, people are like, do you want Chinese food, or should we go to this restaurant? And it's like,
oh, I don't care.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't want to look bad. You know, I don't want to like step on someone's toes, but state the preference. Like, it doesn't mean that you have to go to where you want to go. It just means that like, you're aware of, oh, I had this urge to go here. Like, and I think that's a really good kind of ground zero place to start for sure.
Yeah. And it's okay. And give yourself permission to have a preference. It's a good thing.
Yes. There's so much about, permission here, I think too. Like, oh, like you have wants, you have preferences, you have the internal expectations and the external expectations. Which one's way more? That kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Okay. So awesome convo. Thank you so much, Molly, for being on with us. So social media and other upcoming stuff for Molly is at Molly Kate Wellness on Instagram. You do an amazing job. There's so much good practical stuff for like, you know, I just love when social media is like useful, you know, like it's not just like all this like stuff. It's like,
I lost you for a sec.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
You were going into what you loved about me, and then it's want to hear it.
Come on. Well, I was just saying that in case that didn't come up, that Molly Kate at Molly Kate Wellness on Instagram, super practical, great info. So I love it when social media is
It did it again.
It's doing it
Dude,
again.
it did.
Oh my gosh, the universe is telling me that I don't need this.
I will share. She has a lot of practical kind of tips and tools that you can really start implementing now. And I also follow Molly Kate, and it is, I agree 100%. It's heartfelt, it's genuine, and it's just the things that you share is really beautiful. So thank you for all you're doing in this world.
Yeah, thank you. I've kind of decided recently that like my goal is to just be super relatable. Like I just want people to feel like they're not alone, that we're all in this together, and that's kind of my goal, is to help people realize that, oh, it's not just me. So yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you love it.
Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully I'm back, because there's also a brand new Facebook group or Facebook page. Is it a Facebook group?
It's a group. Yep.
Okay.
It's called Food Confident. That's where I kind of talk about all my stuff. So join me there. I give away, all of us give away so much like free content and free information for you guys. So that just opened up. And then I will also be opening up group coaching either in July or August. I'm still kind of trying to figure out the details, but I'm opening it up to just 10 women who are just ready to get started on their intuitive eating journey. And maybe if you feel super anxious around food and you're just super ready to make friends with food again and start loving yourself again and your body, and that's what you want to do, it's the spot for you. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Go check
Awesome.
her out. And Molly will hopefully also be an guest expert on The Gathering, which of course is the membership site that Kylee and I are doing. So hopefully you guys are either on that already by the time this airs, or you're thinking about it. And this is just another reason to hop on over there, because it's super affordable. You can do, multiple things, and it's a great community, and Molly will be joining us there hopefully too.
Yay, yes, of course. I accept.
Oh, yay. Okay.
I had so much fun today, guys. Like we said when we started, I feel like I'm just like podcasting with my friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a blast.
Yay.
Oh, thank you so much, Molly.
Yeah. Talk to you guys soon.
Okay.